Well, welcome everyone. This is the 7th session of Advanced Architectural Design lecture series. We have Louise Lemoine here. And just a few words before Ana Maria Meister introduce the guest speakers, Louise Lemoine. I believe that the work of Louis Lemoine and Bêka it's fundamental to understand the way architecture is engaging with criticality and with the rest of societies at large. I think if we died now like architects, let's say, if that's a good metaphor, the last images that will come to our mind would be images, of course, that Bêka and Lemoine produced. We will have Guadalupe, maybe we will have a person talking of his apartment in Airbnb. There will be a number of images that will connect architecture with life in a very relevant way, and many of them will be coming from the work that in the last years Bêka and Lemoine have done. I think it's a monumental work, very diverse, very complex, moving to new grounds all the time. And in the discussion that we're having of what is that architectural practices have that make them relevant, and what is the way that we can rethink the perspectives from which the relevance of our architectural design practices can be empowered and incremented. The work of Bêka and Lemoine are really the blueprint of a huge amount of things and challenges and opportunities that we're facing. So we're really, really happy to have this session with you, Louis. And let's start.
Okay, this works, right? So, welcome everyone. Welcome, Louise. Louise Lemoine and Bêka are filmmakers, decorated ones at that. Their entire works are now in the MoMA collection. They're invited to architecture biennales and triennales all over the world, with their contributions often celebrated as the standout works in the reviews. Moriyama-san just won the Best Film Award at the Lisbon Architecture Film Festival, and Kohlhaas House Life has become a cult movie for architects. They have been called one of the most exciting and critical design projects of the year 2016 by the Met. And I think that's a definition that's spot on. Their films are films, but also architectural critique. They excite us, and they're design projects themselves. Because I would argue that really, they are architects, and not just by training. Not only do they show in their movies how architecture is used, lived in, maintained, and recreated, they remake the architecture they film as much as the architecture in their films remakes their protagonists. Their films bring important recent concerns in our discipline to the fore. Cities as habitats made through and by their inhabitants. The sharing economy as site for aesthetic standardization, questioning boundaries between markets and visions, fantasies and fakes. And maintenance as field of study within architecture, which has only recently found more attention in our discipline. As Bêka and Lemoine show in their work, architecture is not just built and then disseminated as image, but it is continually deconstructed and remade, not just materially with cleaning products, restorations, or decay, but through the people in it. The user or builder of the architectures, or rather Bêka and Lemoine's version of them, often focuses on the gaps, the fringes, and the cracks. Whether it is a zoom in to the self-seating plants on a Barbican terrace, or Moriyama-san reading with his feet dangling out of his window, sitting on the edge. It is that edge where their architecture is constructed, precisely where conventional architecture history declares the end of the building. Their work opens up the spaces in between, around, below, and above. Set after the photographers leave, the films portray architecture as living biosphere, each part necessary to sustain the other. The filmmakers are always there. Their presence is palpable, but this is not their story. They perform as what anthropologists call participant observers. The stories told here are channeled through the filmmakers' editing and prompting, but are told and performed by the protagonists, Protagonists which are both human and architectural, both animal and object. The complex, the house, the garden, the butterfly, the piano, the inhabitant, they all act on equal terms. There is a calm rhythm to their work that becomes contemplative. While sometimes they show friction between the architecture and the people, or architecture and the stuff, or stuff and the people, the films never lose their slow, steady beat, always guiding the viewer without hectic or violence. Bêka and Lemoine do not record or document, but imagine, watch, and wonder. Their camera work in Moriyama-san makes us believe that each room only exists while we look at it, when someone enters it or lives in it. It might disappear when we don't pay attention. In Selling Dreams, the architecture of the story diffused completely into the imaginary space in which all architecture lives until their stories are told and where they might go after. Documentary here is always fiction and findings, a performance mobilizing a vast cinematic, art historic, and architecture repertoire. Portraying all their subjects, human and otherwise, with genuine curiosity and warmth, Bêka and Lemoine suspend judgment. They look at their subjects with love and patience, not adoration, but real affection, critical, acknowledging flaws and problems, but without ultimate judgment. These are not interviews, but portraits with gentle prodding. When there are questions, they are asked not to pressure, quiz, or investigate, but they become a scaffold for the story that seems to develop independent of their makers. While, of course, highly controlled and constructed, but there's a kind of self-evidence to the flow. By blurring their own subject position into a relatable, inhabitable one, asking questions for us, they invite us, the viewer, to take their place. Watching the films as architects and critics makes us wonder about our cynicism and our own neglect. Who are the people we don't look at? What are the spaces that we fail to notice? What can productive criticism really look like? Most of all, they give us the present of time. Their work makes us fall in love with architecture all over again, but without the capital A. The architecture that these films show, or rather create, is like the ship Argo, continuously remade piece by piece, but not in order to change, but to become itself. These are not stories of buildings, but of their becoming, a becoming that depends on the stories we tell and the stories we will yet start telling. So thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to your talk and to the discussion after. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm extremely pleased to be here today. Very honored to be here in this temple of knowledge. I thank so much Andres and Ana Maria for this invitation, and it's a great way to present me. I'm impressed. I'm not sure if I recognize myself so much. I'm so sorry my partner Eli is not here with me because we do everything together, and yeah, we've been working together for the past 10 years. And it's true that when he's not here, I feel a bit alone, and because we are very different. I'm French, Eli is Italian, and I think this kind of cultural difference explains a lot in our films. My French rationality and his Italian fantasy make these films as they are. So unfortunately, you got today the French rationality, and so it will not be the most entertaining show. But I'll do my best to think of Ila. So maybe can we switch up the lights a little bit at least? No, it's not the... So we can see maybe more. No, oh, yeah.
I think the other one might be the...
Yes, okay.
This might be the best now, so can see
Okay,
the
okay, you see the screen. Okay, this is good. Let's see. So, Yeah, I'm starting with the first image, and I'll be a little bit long on this one. It's not really the more passionate one, but at least it will help me to introduce a little bit our work, because it's mapping 10 years of research in the field of architectural representation. Starting, our first film has been this one, called As House Life, released in 2008. And then you read it like this. It's like a zzzt, 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 and this blank one. They are not all there. In 10 years, we have been working very much, a bit too much. Until now, we have been making 27 films, I think, which is far too many. But yeah, because here the blank one is for 4 new films we've been doing in this last month, not yet released. And in this one, yeah, you have 5 films, etc. So maybe as a start, it's interesting to see what do we see here. We see mainly faces, bodies, scenes, stories. So not much about architecture. And if you have seen a few films of us, it's true that maybe for architects, you at the end of the film you are a bit confused and don't understand very much where do we want to go, because you hardly see architecture as a subject, but constantly on the back. And you mainly hear people telling personal stories. It goes from love stories to the life of a dog, or to a postman, or many types of stories. But this is really intentional, hopefully. And it explains a little bit the displacement of the point of view we wanted to operate in the way we intend an architecture film. I like to quote, to explain a little bit this, Pina Bausch, you know, the German choreographer, very famous choreographer. She used to say that I'm not interested in how people move, but what moves them. And I really enjoy this sentence of Pina, because I could say a little bit that we do the same sort of displacement from form to emotion. So we try to interest ourselves to architectural forms on the background, and to put emotions or psychological understanding of forms of architecture at the forefront. We could say we are not interested in architecture as a frontal subject, but much more in how architecture moves us, how it shapes us, and how architecture influences the way we live. Because we are completely shaped, conditions, and sometimes, hopefully, stimulated by the spaces we live in. So we try to understand in our films how we are under influence, how this operates, and how sometimes also it can create the conditions to relate to each other. So let's say that on these thematics we have made 27 variations approaching the same global theme, but each time on various scales, on a various scale, starting from a private house, going through many typologies of buildings, from this is a grape picking building, a building for grape pickers in a very famous wine chateau in France. These are office buildings, museums, an island we've made on several collective housing, and until the city scale. We are currently working much more on the city scale. So maybe as a start, I would like to introduce some sort of the conceptual framework in which we started, and I stay a little bit in this film, which has been a sort of matrix, because this film, we released it in 2008, and it has been a real experimental playground for us. Eli and myself. Eli is an architect, and I was not trained as an architect myself. I studied more art history and many other things, but we really thought architecture was a good territory to explore in terms of representation. And so we tried to make a film which combined many of our personal interests and in complete freedom, because then maybe we can discuss about how the pressure about film production. So this, the freedom of this film can be also explained by its production conditions, because we made it as a sort of holiday project, completely out of any funds, and so we made it as we wanted, the two of us. Yes. And so no one had to say nothing about it. So we really wanted to start questioning ourselves about the limits of representation in architecture. We have to say that this film has been made in the context. The cultural context was important because it was in the peak period of the Archistar phenomena and the post-Bilbao effect, etc. So we were very much interested in understanding this iconic status of architecture. We were extremely interested to deal with this idea and to understand how we relate to a masterpiece, how what it means, and what it means in terms of how do we receive this knowledge from a masterpiece, but what response can we give also individually? And so we really wanted to understand this concept of admiration and transform the passivity we have towards this status, this untouchable status of an icon. So yes, we wanted to put into question this passivity towards admiration, beauty, and perfection. And so that's why we try to understand the communication strategies in architecture, the typologies of images that were produced, and we made a film which tried to transform a little bit what can be shown of an important building. Yes, so this is our main character, Guadalupe, and it's maybe we can talk about this later, but it's really, really interesting to touch on these big, important figures, because in any kind of filmmaking, by the way, it's much more difficult to deal with questions of power rather than weakness. And so it's extremely difficult to, we have worked then afterwards in many important buildings such as the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, many other Pritzker Prize winner architects' buildings, etc. And so it's extremely difficult to enter into these mechanisms of power also. So we wanted to introduce a certain crack of reality within this environment of perfection. And so I'll show you a little extract of it. this is the opening scene of the film. The whole film is not staged as it is, as this opening scene, but at least you perceive the character. It's very much Jacques Tati like. We loved Jacques Tati at that time, French filmmaker, and so it was very much influenced by him. But what we really wanted to introduce, and then we worked on it later in many other films. So this is the building, House in Bordeaux by Rem Koolhaas OMA, built in 1998. Another photographs. Okay, and this is the composition. It looks like the filmography, but it's the composition of the film. All our films, we built them on the collection of fragments. We deconstruct architecture in themes or in spaces, and we sort of play like a Lego game with a lot of small little chapters, like in a book, and we recompose architecture through a collection of little stories, little scenes, which can embody each time either a space or a theme. But globally, what we really wanted to develop through all these films is what we can call a sort of anthropology of the ordinary. We very much like this idea of ordinary because we are constantly obsessed by exceptionality, by bigger-than-life events, and by heroes, which occupy most of our interests. And so we, in reference to Georges Perec, a French writer, very well known by architects, he wrote a very, very interesting, very small and less known text entitled in French Interroger l'habituel, which could be translated, it's not translated into English, but it could be translated as questioning the ordinary. And it's very interesting, his point of view on this aspect, because he constantly made books about very ordinary subjects and detailing so much the ordinary little things of our lives to which we didn't give any interest. And so it's a little bit what we do also in our films. We try to find the poetics into the very normal, into normality, yes. So these are images of yes, how people move into the building. So these are the routes, but and this is the full routes of the different characters in the film. I'll move. Oh, papas. Sorry, I will do a very big jump of many years because we don't have so much time. This is another film by a much older building by Auguste Perret in Paris. And it's a sort of masculine character in counterpoint of Guadeloupe. We go through the history of this building through the various inhabitants. But I skip this. And yeah, I want to talk about a film we made in the Barbican estate in London, Barbicania. It's interesting because we completely changed of scale. Most of you certainly know the Barbican in London, very important brutalist building, big ensemble, built in what is called the city, the financial district in London. The Barbican Centre, which is one of the biggest cultural centers in Europe, was asked us to make a movie about them, about the building, about the complete project, both art center and estate. The estate is about 2,000 apartments, and it's really built as a sort of citadel, a big castle, closed castle, inside, within the very center of London. And so the idea was to jump into this closed castle for a month, and we made a film like a diary of our experience of this residency inside the Barbican for a month. And the idea was very much to understand the global identity of this place, but making a collection or dividing the 1 month length of this experiment and the territory of the Barbican estate into this is we entitled it Barbicania, like a microcosm, because for a month we didn't go out of the Barbican. It was our little world. So no, sorry. So this is the film is composed around this calendar of 31 days. It was a month of July, and each day is devoted to someone we met or a space we wanted to work on, etc. So you go through the building through these days, and each day is a sort of surprise. So this is the map of the film. So as I said initially, we compose our films as diaries, but diaries which decompose time and space at the same time. So each of these little images is a fragment which compose the film. And even if you think, when you show only one, you don't understand much about the entire building. But it's true that the collection of fragments that you can perceive an experience of the space, you can perceive a global emotion, let's say, a global idea, even if we don't explain you specifically where you are. So this is an aerial view. You can imagine how dense it is. And this is another view. So I want to introduce maybe as an example, because the way we work mainly is not to deal with architecture in theoretical or even historical terms, but we really want to transmit an experience of the place. So we do it through mainly encounters, people we meet. And so it's only let's say, case studies, completely grounded into the daily experience. And so we met this extremely lovely lady. It's an extraordinary story because her name is Regina, and she worked all her life at the Buckingham Palace. So, and she collected all her life some crowns to become the Regina herself, because the Regina in Italian means queen. This is an extract.
Oh, I do. I am addicted. Really? To colour, yeah. I have every colour you can imagine. And this room, I coloured from the green of the background there and the colour of Marilyn's face. So it's a genuine Andy Warhol. Oh, well, the Queen, I have worked at Buckingham Palace. Yeah, and the French Embassy. I worked in the garden party office. You know, the garden parties for a year. And when I first went there, this is now 30 years ago, we handwrote 40,000 invitations. But we loved it, you know. The meaning of my name, Regina, Queen, yeah. But it isn't Queen for royalty, it's for religion. You know, Mary, the mother of Jesus, yeah, because I'm Roman Catholic. You're fantastic. Your friend? Excusez-moi? find out at the palace that, some of the staff used to say, "Oh, good morning, Your Majesty," Regina, yeah. "Good morning, Your Majesty." And they were so funny, so cute. Anyway, that's fun, isn't it? I think it was V&A, about £1.50 or something. And then Loic, my adorable little Loic, he gave me this. This is for, it had a small. When I saw this card at an exhibition, I thought, what an excellent likeness. Also hoping that it would remind you of the 3 happy summers we spent guiding at Clarence House. With love, Anne. So what a likeness. Yeah. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Marilyn is more than a queen. I think that Marilyn was a very gifted lady, but the men wanted her as a sex idol. Yeah. This is a lovely Warhol. I like the paintings of Andy Warhol.
Actually, I never knew if it was a true or a fake Andy Warhol. I was really amazed if it could be a true one. But it's interesting because so through this excerpt in which you didn't see even the outsides of the Barbican, it talks a lot about the social composition of the Barbican. The Barbican, the project started after the war in the 50s and ended in the 80s, and you had the first inhabitants. Regina is one of the first inhabitants. There are in the films other old ladies like this, completely irresistible, and it has evolved so much in recent years because it has changed completely in terms of architecture evaluation. It has been really appreciated so much, whereas it was considered for decades the ugliest building in the UK. And so you have a lot now of wealthy architects coming in and much more trendy people, whereas you still have a little bit of this old community living. And so we made a sort of mix. This can introduce the other film we did on another collective housing. We made both films, Barbicania and The Infinite Happiness, very, very close. We did, I think, we shot during 1 month there in the summertime, and in the fall we stayed 1 more month in the 8th house built by Bjarke Ingels in Copenhagen. And so it was extremely interesting for us to apply the same methodology to, I couldn't say a similar environment, because in terms of culture, in terms of scale, in terms of social composition, it's very different. But at least we could really understand what it means to live together in different cultures. And that's really, was really the point of making these 2 films. So the 8th house, which has the shape of an 8, we stayed 1 month. A nice Danish family left their flat for us, and we became a resident inside the big 8th house, which is composed of about 500 apartments, and you have also offices, you have shops, you have a school, a kindergarten. So it's really in the heritage of La Cité Radieuse, the idea of a full city, a vertical city. And so we try to understand how architecture has enabled the creation of a community, and actually it works very well. Whereas in London, in the film, you discover that people don't even know their neighbors with which they share their balcony. They've been living 15 years and they never met their neighbors in the Copenhagen building. It's quite impressive how the architecture itself has been able to propose a social model which really works well, even if there are, of course, some defects of the or the other side of the medals of the success of the building. We met one man who had a heart attack because of the touristic buses going in front of his window, and it creates so much stress because it's so much visited that he had to leave because of the success, but at least he could earn a lot of money selling his flat. So this is some views about the buildings. It's been built in the outskirts of the city, inside view, and an extra which talks. No, this is the trailer. I don't like so much trailers. These are other inhabitants, and so this is these are all the places where we've gone through the film. The film explores, as I showed for the Barbican, select some places, try to deconstruct the building in some situations, and so in yellow you have all the places where we've been. And this is an extract I like.
Hun hedder altså Amelia. Han siger, han hedder noget andet. Han siger, hej piger. Jeg hedder Jack O'Lantern. Min dyrebare skat er blevet stjålet. Og I skal hjælpe mig med at finde den. Jeg så ham, der stjal den. Han har en hvid kappe på. Og det drysser hvidt fra knoglen på hans ene ben. Det drysser hvidt fra hans ben. Knoglen, du ved, så er der ikke noget på benet, så har han bare sådan en knogle, og så drysser den. Hej piger, har I fundet tyven? Nej. Hvad hvis vi går op på 8-tallet? Hvad hvis vi går op ad trappen? Eller prøv lige her. Prøv lige alle piger at høre efter. Ja. Det er en skattejagt, og det er en leg, og alt sammen er noget, jeg har fundet på. Ikke? They are scared. It's too scary a treasure. Ej, hvad var det?
Det var krabben. Jeg kan ikke.
Skal jeg prøve at binde op?
Ja. Amelia! Salat!
Hej piger. Nå for søren. Har I stadigvæk ikke fanget ham?
Nej.
Okay, nu har I ledt oppe. Der var han ikke. Tror I, vi skal lede nede? For eksempel et sted under jorden? Ja?
Nede i kælderen.
Det var en god idé. Nede i kælderen, hvordan kommer vi derned?
Tag elevatoren. Jeg har bare...
Venter vi lige herude. Fordi nu, vi går bare lige herud og venter, så tror jeg, de andre kommer ned. Så skal vi gå og se, hvad de er alle sammen har. Jeg har fat i den.
Nej, det har jeg ikke. Jeg håber ikke det.
Er det rigtigt?
Jeg tror godt.
Er der en sæd?
Ja, hvad er det?
gør det.
Der er navne, jeg råber op. Så har vi en Stella. Hvor er Stella hen?
So you see, the last image could have been the way we shot the film, but actually we chose to go to a birthday party to express how lively and playful the building is. I think it talks a little bit more rather than a very fixed image. So yeah, the idea is really to make films that can transmit an experience of the space rather than explaining it. I think emotionally speaking, it talks so much more, and architecture is really about experimenting space. So that's why we wanted to make films this way. Maybe because I think Spirity was part of the film selected, I say a few short words. Spirity has been an art commission by Fondazione Prada in Milan. Both Fondazione Prada and OMA asked us to make a film. It was very uncommon for us because they asked us to make a film during the last phase of construction of the renovation of an old distillery, Spirit Distillery, in the outskirts of Milan, which was becoming the new venue for the Fondazione Prada collection, art collection. And so it was extremely difficult for us to understand how to make a film within this chaos of a building site. And it was the last month, and so you cannot imagine the pressure because the time was really passing, and with the idea of the big opening, so no one was there for us. And so we had to invent another way of working which could transmit let me come back a second. The Spirity is the title of the film. It's a full concept because it's the name of the old distillery, Spirity. It was named this way. On the big doors, you have I don't remember the full name, but Spirity was the name of the. And Spirity, as in English, it has various meanings. It can mean spirit, the brain, but also ghost, right? And we were extremely interested by this polysemy in order to make the film out of it, because we were interested to understand that we were working in a phase of this building which will disappear. And the industrial past of this building, which was a distillery, would not be present anymore just on... maybe you have old industrial spaces, but transformed in white cubes. So you had this past, but very, very like phantomatic. And also the working part of it, all these workers working, this chaotic world was to disappear in a few days. This working force and this presence. So we wanted to keep this as a spirit, this floating spirit. That's why we worked on this idea of the ghost and of the distillation of this presence. I will show you a little extract. Yes. So it was about stillness in a world of movement, completely chaotic movement. How to still a moment of stillness. Yes, maybe I'm too long. No? Okay. I have two more projects to talk a little bit about. Moriyama-san, it's funny because we started with the first film. Our first film was about a private house, and then we kept moving on bigger scales. And curiously, Moriyama-san is also about a private house, many years after Cola's House Life, but it was an accident, and our lives is very much about accident, but we couldn't resist to this one, so we said, yes, we'll do this film. Moriyama House, many people here may know, of course. It's a house built by Ryo Nishizawa, a partner of Sana in Tokyo. And we met Nishizawa-san many years ago, and he just completed the house at that time, and he knew our film, Cola's House Life, and he told us once, it could be funny if you do a film about Mr. Moriyama, who's a real character. But it was never the right moment. We never found fundings to do that, and actually it was in Japan, not in Europe, so a little bit more complex to do. And it was never the right moment. And then during, it was 2 summers ago, something like that, Ila was in Japan, in Tokyo at that moment, and Nishizawa took him to Mr. Moriyama to visit the house. And actually the encounter with Mr. Moriyama at that moment was so strong, so powerful, that Ila said, "Oh, Mr. Moriyama, can I stay with you a few days?" And Mr. Moriyama, who is, you'll see, an extraordinary man, said, "Okay." And actually the pity is that I was not present. We talked for years, 8 years, to make this film, and at the end we had to make it while I was not there. So it all started with music. Moriyama-san is passionate. Actually, he's an extraordinary, complex man who lives like Robinson Crusoe in the core of Tokyo, in what has become one of the most famous Japanese house. But he still lives in an extraordinary, preserved and personal way, even if he is aware of the famous status of the house he lives in. He doesn't care much. He receives people, but he really lives his own life. And this house is very much about his own pleasure, and that's extraordinary, I think. So we were very impressed by this this characteristic of him, and he's extremely cultivated. He knows experimental French cinema as no one in France. He listens. He's passionate about noise music, even any kind of music, but noise music he's extremely a fan, or any kind of literature. And about noise music was really the key between Ila and Moriyama-san, because Nishizawa thought of making a joke, introducing Moriyama-san to Ila, saying, he likes a very special music. He likes very much noise music. And Ila said, "Oh, I do like noise music too." And so that's why when they entered this basement, you have the image there, the basement, it was full of the most difficult to find Japanese noise music, and Ila was actually getting crazy. So that's why their encounter was so strong. I'll show you an extract. And you certainly know the project, but it's extremely interested because the house has been splitted into 10 little white cubes of various heights. And actually, Mr. Moriyama, the economical construction also of the house is interesting, because Moriyama-san has been able to build this project renting half of the cubes. He lives in 4 or 5 of them and rents the other ones. That's how he elaborated this sort of economic equilibrium. Yes, this is just the trailer.
Happy birthday. Oh my God.
Yes. So this is an aerial view of the project. He recently, we met him recently, and he said he has like 10 tourists a day. And it's a very small scale project, so 10 tourists a day is a lot of people, far too much. So please don't visit if you go to Tokyo. Just watch the film and you'll know more than meeting him. Do you want another extract? But I'm not sure I have enough time. Oh, yes? No, No, I skip this and we go to Homo Urbanus maybe. So then that's the current project we've been developing for the last 2 years. And it's difficult for me actually to even talk about it, because it's so fresh and so complex in my mind that I'm sure you understand better than I do. And Homo Urbanus, we have completed 5 films, and we have made two more in Japan recently. So it's, yes, a sort of video installation of 7 films now. All this started with an art commission for a biennale in France, Agora Biennale in Bordeaux. And they made a biennale about the moving landscape, urban landscapes, and they asked us to make films in various cities. Actually, we didn't have the choice of the cities. They asked us to work in Bogota, in St. Petersburg, in Seoul, in Rabat, Morocco, and in Naples, in Italy. And recently we added 2 more films in Tokyo and in Kyoto also, because we've been staying there the last 6 months. And Homo Urbanus is a sort of, it's questioning what the status of our current conditions of Homo Urbanus, which means our condition of human beings in cities. This sort of strange social animal we all are now, most of us. And we understand it in a horizontal way. We have been making these films not as a portrait of Bogota, not as a portrait of St. Petersburg, etc., but we really show it in a comparative dynamic. And so it's more like an anthropological question, and also like far more philosophical questioning about who we are becoming as inhabitants of cities, the conditions we live in, how globally the environment, which is even natural or built. Natural is also very important, like climate, topography, and built, depending on the density of the cities, etc. And also, of course, the history we share in terms of culture, of socio-economic and cultural history, and all these features gathered together make a certain urban culture, and we try to collect in all these cities our urban habits, our behaviors, and to understand in this phenomena of globalization of urban cultures what remains of also local singularities in our urban behaviors. I think you have seen, maybe some of you, the film on Bogota, and which was for us very interesting in terms of how the climate. Sorry? I didn't understand. How the climate, because you have heavy rains once a day, which changes completely the landscape of the city. The rain goes up to almost the knee, and so it reconfigures everything. And you have a lot of spontaneous little jobs inventing themselves like this. And we try to understand what's going on in these moments and the reconfiguration of everything. So we made this in very different climates. Maybe I have an extract here from St. Petersburg. No, this is Seoul, sorry.
거기 어딘데? 야, 무슨 아니야?
그러니까 징글징글해요. 나 진짜 지금 내가 오빠
See, you see that they all were weight, either physical or psychological. And so we in each city, we work mainly on the street level. We use the street as a sort of stage of the silent rules of a society, trying to find scenes and situations which talk a lot about the poetics of the ordinary, in which we find the local singularities. So this is the current project. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, it's been long.
No, it's good. We have time. There's always a few more for the studio, but it's okay. So we'll start the discussion. Thank you so much for the talk. I'll just start with a fairly short question. So architecture, especially on the building scale, but in a way also in the city movies, mostly seems very well behaved. And so are the inhabitants. So everybody seems fairly contained, and there's a certain rhythm. And at the same time, you select mostly, let's say, good architecture in the sense that it's an architecture that's iconic or kind of respected in the architecture community. So I wonder, there's not really much, let's say, there's no violence, there's not real appropriation in the sense of destruction or break, like there's a certain harmony. There's no real ugliness. You find the poetics. There's no bad quality, let's say, in a way that we would usually talk about it. So I was wondering if you could imagine making a film about bad architecture or bad people, how that would look like, and what the soundtrack to something like that would be, because music is also so important for your films.
Oh, that's a difficult question. And that's terrible because I would have to make names, no? So
we'd love to hear names.
No, let's say that the selection of architecture initially, as I said before, started with the idea of dealing with iconic buildings. So it was very much really intended to select some of the Pritzker Prize winner architects and some very iconic building, because initially it started with more a sort of critical idea of dealing with architecture representation and how we can transform the way we look at these specific buildings that all of us already knew. And that's actually a very important key, because we couldn't make films as we did, not explaining the building from the basic elements, because we intended that our public was already knowing it. And so we were bringing another type of approach, another type of look, but you had to know a little bit this building, because otherwise you could completely even didn't understand anything. So that's why we started with this. It's funny you say well-behaved people and there is no ugliness. Actually, for instance, in the first film, I saw it again recently. I was a little bit. I hope we have made a little bit of technical progress in the years, because Cola's House Life is really sort of harsh in the editing part above all, and. But it's interesting because in this film we also show aspects that are usually hidden, you know, like leaks and failures in a certain sense. We are very much interested by the question of failure. We do not look for ugliness, but we try to be rather frank and not hiding what an editor, a publishing editor, would Photoshop right away. So we really wanted to deal with these questions of what's kept hidden. But yes, I think we are in a certain way also aiming you have documentaries, and most part of documentary filmmaking is about the tragedy of humanity, and it's extremely useful. But we are trying also to find some poetry and some to be able to continue. So yes, we like Moriyama-san, for instance. It's a film that I think when you meet this man through the film, it really fills you with hope, and I think we need a little bit of this.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. And it's like that's. I mean, it's kind of the. Maybe it speaks more to the times we're in and the other works, that's something that's noticeable, that this is hopeful, and not even when you show but you don't expose in a derogatory way. It's a kind of a reconciliation project, let's say.
Yes. More recently, we were maybe more critical initially, but now more and more we understand that we have to share the beauty of even people's life. More and more we go through our work, I think we are more and more interested in finding poetry in the way we live, and so we share people that has really touched us in a way, and so that's why we concentrate so much on people's life.
Yeah, regarding that attitude, I was really interested in how anthropology influences your work, ethnography influences your work. And I wanted to ask you about these moments in Spirity, one of which you showed of the builders with the backgrounds moving and them not moving, and then moving their hands over. I found that interesting, is that it was stepping outside of that anthropological kind of skill set, because you're beginning to direct, in my mind, some of the action around you, not to be, as the term Anna Maria introduced, to be a participant observer only, but also to have an argument about new icons, about new, because that to me referenced religious icons. And another moment I wanted to mention related to that is when Murayama-san is relaxing and he's comfortable and he's talking about the moving curtain and how he can see the sky. And Ila says, "No, stay there, I'll get you a beer." And he tries to direct the scene, but it fails because there's an understanding that it's a documentary, that he actually refuses the direction. So I wanted to ask you about those moments in which you are directing action. And because it seems like a lot of your decisions are made in the field, so to speak, like at the time. So how do those moments come in? How does that develop, that you begin to direct some action around you to strengthen the film?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's always on. We work very much with improvisation. Let's say that we do not write our films like screenplays before. In a normal cinema production system, you would need to do so before for asking money to producers and TV, etc. So we refuse this because we try to make a cinema which is really transmitting the direct emotion, the moment as it is appearing for us. And so we only work initially on the methodology and not on the specific scene as it will be. So in Spirity, it was different because actually the conditions were extremely difficult for us. As I said, it was the last month of the building site, and this excerpt is staged. It's true, but we asked like 3 seconds of stillness to these different persons, and it was the most we could ask. So we tried in this chapter of the film, we tried to deal with painting history, the still portrait, because it's interesting, of course, portraying a work like in the history of painting, which you have only aristocratic people. And so this has been staged, but it was like it was born like out of the constraint of the production conditions, because we wanted to shape something out of these very difficult site, and so it's the only thing we could do with them. But usually, yes, we are more we are in the flow of the situation. We arrive at people at the Barbican, for instance, or in the 8 House. We choose the people with which we will spend some time. But once we enter someone's place, it's the unknown. We do not know what will happen. And so it's really about an encounter in the full sense of it. So it's, hazard.
Yeah, should we open it up to...
Yeah, let's have some questions from the audience. We have more questions, but I think there must be more questions in the audience also. So if you just raise your hand, there's people with microphones.
Hi. You said that you chose some of the people to interview, like at the Barbican or at the 8 House. What is the decision process, and to what degree are you involved in the interview process? Like when Regina puts on the tiara, or there was the guy that at the Barbican who was discussing the color pink. How do you navigate the
yes.
So how do you navigate that to frame the characters that you are trying to capture?
Yeah, it's interesting because we need each time. We don't have much time. We only could spend 1 month in each of the buildings, and it was Barbican is really, really big. You have, yes, I said 2,000 apartments more or less, and we had all the art center also to deal with, etc. So we try to understand which place could be the hubs for us to create a network of people we meet. And there we found a hairdresser. You have a very old hairdresser in the Barbican estate, an old lady, and she was actually the epicenter of all the old ladies of the Barbican estate. And so that's why we could enter some houses of these ladies thanks to the hairdresser. But we have to find these sort of key people each time to open the doors, because it's extremely difficult. We are not very, it's difficult to open the door to foreigners arriving in your little house with a camera and asking questions. I mean, it's easier to say no. And we hopefully, I don't know if I could say hopefully, because actually we discovered afterwards that between the estate and the art center, there was a historic conflict. And so we had a letter from the art center saying that we were doing this project and that if everyone could be helpful, etc. But actually, in the estate, it was not helpful at all, because the estate itself was not helping really at all. So we tried to create every day our little networks and bringing cakes and being nice, and so that's why we met people. But yeah. In the 8 House, as it is a much more recent community, a little bit smaller, and the building has not even 10 years, so they are much more technological, and so they have a sort of intranet. They have what they call the 8 book, the local Facebook. And thanks to this, and it works extremely well, thanks to this invention of their intranet, they invented so many practices. They have clubs of any types, etc. So we made an announce on their intranet, and that's how in a few days we had many friends. But yeah, and we've been invited for cakes and for music, for kids parties, and many types of things. But each time we have to find this sort of key to enter everywhere. It's not easy to find right away. We lose a little bit of time initially, but then when you meet once, they will present you other friends and etc. So you create your, you extend your network. Yeah, it's not scientifically based. It's complete opportunity.
Hi. Regarding the final scene that you showed in Infinite Happiness.
Can you speak
sorry.
louder?
Regarding the final scene that you showed in Infinite Happiness, regarding the still image, I wonder if it's of any value to your work deploying that method, much like how Ai Weiwei, for example, in Human Flow, juxtapose sort of the more personal shots with larger panoramic or drone shots of the entire sort of migration pattern. I wonder if it's any, like, if you can sort of deploy that, or have you looked into sort of showcasing the entire example of the Barbican as they're all sort of juxtaposed in the same shot?
Sorry, I didn't understand very clearly. You are talking about the last shot we put in the extract with the kids, right?
Yes.
So the still image of the same space, and how we use if we use these kind of images in the films.
Yes, if it's of if it's of any use to you, as opposed to sort of the perspective shots of you following children.
Yeah. For instance, we the opening scene of a film, the second film we did in a winery in nearby Bordeaux, in the Bordeaux area, wine area. We opened the film with a beautiful, typically architectural shots, and then we made it like a clash, a strong clash of the same space, full of grape pickers shouting and and having party in the same space, and that was our beginning. We need to be a bit more like direct in the to express our intents, in the sense that we juxtaposed these two images as two methodologies of showing architecture, and the clash in between the two was very much expressing the route or the itinerary we were choosing ourselves. So yes, as a start, we used this clash, but then we moved on our personal way, I think. Yes.
There was also a question here.
Yeah, go on. And then maybe Benedict. Yeah.
Should I start?
Go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah, just go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for lecture. I was able to participate on one of your lecture that you had in Seoul in Contemporary Art Museum of Korea.
With Ila,
but that time there was Ila instead of you, so I had a bit of a romantic side of the explanation, but today I have a rational side of the explanation, so I guess I have both of a balance. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I watched the Moriyama-san clip that last time, yeah. Well, I just want to ask you about the methodology of your work, because in terms of urban scale projects, because I wonder, like, how do you make a former research of the city? Because based on Bogota film, it seems the film is more focused on the daily life and captures the daily life of the day. But the short film that you just showed of the soul on the last clip, the project seems to reflects the understanding of people who are living there, so that it seems that you are actually showing some of the basic research that you've done before coming to Seoul. So I just wanted to ask your methodology of when you're actually filming.
In these films, urban films?
The urban scale films, instead of architecture.
For most of them, it was the first time we were discovering the city. And it was a sort of a challenge, We had very short time to go, and the idea was a sort of immediate response, understanding and filming at the same time. So being an active observer, trying to catch all the elements that we were watching, and which for us could be elements of understanding of local particularities and local ways of life in relation to the urban environment. And so in each city, the direction we gave to the film is extremely subjective, and each time also the theater is also limited. We were not working for a tourist agency, so the idea was not to give the most beautiful insights and the sightseeing of the city. So sometimes when we talk with people from one of these cities, they say, oh la la, but why did you choose only this aspect, or why did you choose only that street, etc., because it doesn't give the sense of the city, of the global city. But each time we very much sustain the partiality and subjective point of view, because as I said initially, we do not make a film on this city, but we are much more interested in collecting various habits around the world to put together as a sort of fresco of urban habits in different cities. And I think the comparison of the various films is stronger than a single film. But in terms of methodology, it's really following intuition, being a parachute in the center of a city, and following the intuition of things that happens, looking for maybe strong scenes that have a certain impact for us, and which displays each time the same questions of for instance, we were very much interested by work in the streets, and in Seoul it's impressive. The relation to work is really impressive. In the film you have a series of people sleeping also in the street, because even standing, sleeping, like a few minutes of relief. We were impressed by this relation to physical effort and strength in the work. That's why the extract is about the weight. In each city we are also interested in manifestation of faith. What space do we still give, or how spirituality occupies or do not occupy any space within our urban practice, or very, very wide and fundamental questions about humanity, but in each city it has different answers, let's say.
Thank you for the brilliant presentation. I was wondering, since you said that it all started as a holiday project from the House of Bordeaux, and now you shifted to actually living at the places where you film. So from your personal experience, how is it to live in the movie?
To live in the movie?
Yes.
You mean?
Yes, because you while you're filming, you're living there. So behind the scenes.
At the Bordeaux house?
No, at the Barbican. So
at the Barbican, yes.
Or Étalet, or actually anywhere after the.
Yes, each time, yes, the urban films, it's another story, but each time I think you cannot do films as we do without having ourselves a living experience, because otherwise it would be a counter-sense, or absurd. But the conditions, even if it's an art commission, for instance, the conditions are really to be able to stay for the longest period we can. So Barbican, 1 month is more or less a sort of balance moment. And of course, it has its limits, because you could say, if you had stayed 1 year, you could have discovered much more and shown much more. But these films have big constraints in terms of production, and so we try to transmit in the most spontaneous way what we have collected within. It's very much about how to transmit a direct experience. So this, in 1 month, this was the result of the experience.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm explaining me well.
So, when you were explaining the Homo Urbanus films, you asked the question, who are we becoming as inhabitants of the city? And in that moment, I searched for the word human, and the first definition that it says is that in common usage, the word human generally refers to the only extant species. So, from the anthropologic perspective that you're putting in your work, can you say that, and from the experience that you have had, if we're in a stage where there are different human species coexisting together?
I think we used this title in reference to the various phase of evolution of hominidae, I mean, of the Homo sapiens we are now. But so it's, yes, questioning a sort of last phase of evolution of our species. And it's well known that now more than the population of the urban population is the most representative. I mean, sorry, I can start again. There are more people living in cities rather than in the rest of countryside, etc. So we wanted to understand how the practices in these artificial worlds we have created that are so artificial, and that sometimes we live in a completely unrooted. We've been creating a world which is almost a nonsense in some places, you know, in such tremendous conditions. We haven't, for instance, made films on the how they call this, the cage apartments, you know, in Hong Kong or something like this. But sometimes urban conditions go to extremes like this. But so we really wanted to make films of observation of how we deal with life in this current state of urban development, and see how we still relate to each other, how we express fundamental questions in this condition. But yes, it's related to the scale of the city and obviously the economic conditions of each city. You have more or less comfortable conditions to live in, and it's true that we've made films actually in either different scales. For instance, Rabat, we didn't choose to make the film, but it was really interesting. And recently we made also a film on Kyoto, which is very, very an interesting scale, because it's like 2 million or 2.5 million of inhabitants, and still having an incredible link to nature, and so there you have a model of extreme harmony in this city. So these films are not to denounce anything, but to observe habits, yes, cultural and urban habits.
Yeah, hi. I noticed that most of your work is in residential setting. So it's about the way people live in like a residential in homes or apartments. I was just wondering, is that because people are the freest or the least curated in these sorts of spaces, that they have the freedom to be who they are? And what is the effect of you as a kind of camera person or as a person who's shooting the film on that person's behavior, and how does that idea of institutionalized behaviors translate to your newer work, which deals with cities?
Sorry, I didn't understand very
Maybe you
clearly.
can rephrase the second half sort of your question.
So what I mean is that when you're dealing with people in their homes and in the most casual settings, they're authentic because of or at least the most authentic they can be with a camera person there. How do you think that kind of changes when you go into a more institutionalized idea of maybe the city, where your behaviors are more, curated because you're aware of the people around you? Because your previous work deals with that authenticity, and I'm wondering how does that. What does that mean in an urban setting?
I don't know. Authenticity. It's an interesting question. Maybe you have more authenticity if you are in a urban context where nothing, because our filming methodology is very different. Even in terms of material. In the residential projects, we take an appointment with someone to enter his apartment. So this is a sort of, not a contract, but we are, someone is waiting for us, we are introduced, we present ourselves, so it's a clear situation. So there is an agreement, if you want. So someone will open his door, with an agreement, and so once you enter someone's place, then you don't know what will happen. But in any case, you know that the presence of the camera is very clear. In the urban films, it's very different because we had to film with very small material, almost invisible, like tourist material or something. Like it's not even a video camera; it's a sort of photo camera, and most of the. Actually, we do not speak anymore with people. We collect images of urban practices, of people acting and scenes. We try to be the closest possible with people, but we do not interact as we were doing before in the films, talking, discussing, and explaining, if you want, through the speech. We do not use speech anymore because, for many reasons, these are much more visual stories because sometimes we do not even speak the same language. For instance, in Seoul or in Japan, we are learning Japanese but not very good at it. So language was a barrier, a frontier, but also we wanted to. It's very difficult. I think the street is the. There is a filmmaker we like very much, a documentarist, Austrian documentarist, Glauberger, very, very interesting, very powerful documentarist, now dead. He said once, like this, in a context like this, he said that the worst thing he could ever do would be a film with someone taking him into a city and saying, okay, now you do a film. That's what we do. This is the worst thing ever for something like him. Because, when we do not stage anything, we take scenes as they appear. We are running and trying to find people, and we know that it's extremely difficult. My partner is actually better than I do in this part because I think documentary filmmaking puts out many moral questions because you you know that you will bother people filming, no? If it's not an agreed situation, if you not open your door saying, okay, welcome, you're here and we will discuss, and you film someone in the street because you think this is a very important situation that it will express so much of the city, etc. You film, but you know that you will bother, for instance, the workers in Seoul holding this super bag, and they were not happy at all that they were being filmed because they were in their working context and there was stress and it has to be quick, etc. And so you have to go over this moment of I miss my word, the gêne of difficulty, of relation difficulty. Sometimes you find people that are very open, and sometimes it's difficult, very difficult to relate. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the way architecture projects are represented in a website like ArcDaily, for example?
Can you tell me again the question?
What are your thoughts on the way architecture is represented on, for example, a website like ArcDaily?
You mean how?
For example, on your
ArcDaily,
website.
I know. But what did you ask? If these type of website, they have a completely other policy of representation. Is this what you are asking for?
I asked because on your website, you seem to be making a claim that's critical about the way architecture is represented in the image, like a clean building with no people in it, this image of perfection that's not actually true to what the project functions as in real life.
Yes, yes, that's what I was trying to explain before. We have tried since the beginning to introduce what I call the crack of reality, because architecture representation is very much linked to the economy of architecture. Because, of course, as in each discipline, an architect needs to promote his work and to make photographs that will represent in its best way the project, of course. But we try to introduce diversity. Of course, we understand that there is. Let me check. Let me find the right word. Efficiency of image, and we do not work with efficiency at all. Our films are not efficient at all for architects, but this is not what we are looking for. It's not efficiency. It's we are trying to approach reality as it is, because we are not under the pressure of promoting the architect or promoting the project, and thanks to this freedom, we can introduce diversity in the representation system, because we are completely outsiders of the economical equilibrium within the architecture discipline. And so, and that's explained a lot about our work, because we are not, in this sort of triangulation of efficiency of the image. We are on the side.
There was one more question in the back. Maybe we make that the last question, and then, because I think we're on time. Go ahead.
So first, thank you for all the videos. They are really important. And my question is, do you have any specific aims or potential audiences when you film these videos? Because for me, it's quite educational. I first watched the Koolhaas House Life 5 years ago at the first day in my in the lecture in my undergraduate university, and that university is in China, and the professor is graduated from Japan, so you're quite influential, like even in Asia. And yes, and the concept of human and architecture have made, like this concept has been instilled in all of us, like back in my university, because of your video. It's like a basic idea, so I really like it. And how do you decide, and how did you find the themes? Because in the smaller scale, like Selling Dreams, the man said he doesn't have any social media accounts right now. So how did you find him? I want to ask. And somehow I think you don't really agree with the man's ideas or value systems. So did you try to express some value tendency, or what do you think, whether you think it's right or not in your videos, or some architecture ideas?
Okay, so Selling Dream, it's true that I didn't have time to present the project. It's rather specific because it was an art commission for the Oslo Triennale. I don't remember precisely the year, but it was like 3-4 years ago, something like this. And every participant had to deal with a theme. Andres actually participated also. And we were given the global theme of the exhibition was after belonging, questioning our current relationship with the idea of belonging. And every participant had a specific theme within this global concept. And we were given the one of the home sharing phenomena. Not to say the Airbnb website. And for months, we have been thinking of what we can do about Airbnb. It was tremendous. We thought maybe we will ask for something else, because we were like blank in our heads. But then we thought of applying the same sort of methodology to the theme. We thought we only use a study case in our work. We try to each time to have a very empirical approach to any kind of subject. And thanks to listening to someone's testimony, we learn a lot. And so we tried to find an interesting type of people. And I started looking for, because I was very much worried about making publicity for Airbnb. This was really not the good direction. So I started looking nights and nights on the tremendous website existing of all the announces you have for denouncing the worst stories about Airbnb. You can Google worst stories about Airbnb. You'll find a lot of websites with incredible stories, each time more crazy. And so then we had to work in Copenhagen. This was also a request from the team of curators. And so in Copenhagen, we already started to know a lot of people, because we have been in relation with a film festival for many years now in Copenhagen. So we come very frequently, and we just made also the 8 House film. So we had a good network of people we knew there, and so we started asking them, all of them, to give advices of people they were knowing, etc. So it's really, it's as we work in our films, like du bouche à bouche, I don't know, du bouche à oreille, sorry. Bouche à bouche is a survival technique. Bouche à oreille. Yeah. Yeah, and we met this guy in this way. So not finding him directly thanks to his website or other, but only through friends of friends of friends of friends of friends. And of course, we do not, how I say, the film do not take his party. I mean, it do not take his side, but we were extremely interested in showing publicly a story that could express in itself all the absurdity of this system. And he was condensing so much of the dérive in French, which means how a system drifts, no, in the worst way also, that he was a perfect case for us, expressing, and we were amazed by his inventiveness in his craziness, no? And I love this when a certain craziness becomes almost artistic, you know, and it was a marvelous combination. Yes.
So maybe we stop on the marvelous combination, and thank you so much.
Thank you.